Coming up on today's episode of the Moneypants Superpower Hour, consequences and control. Are those bad words? Some people think so. Today, we'll discuss why consequences and control are not only good, but absolutely necessary. We'll discuss the two types of consequences, both natural and logical, and what the role of parents are in administering them. We'll talk about unintended consequences and how to teach your kids to start considering the consequences of their actions. We'll also talk about how consequences and freedom are related and how to determine what freedoms are age appropriate. Plus, we'll share some specific ideas on how Moneypants bridges the gap between living at home and being on your own. All this and more, but first, the joke of the day.
During a visit to the mental asylum, a visitor asks the director, "So how do you determine whether or not a patient should be institutionalized?" "Well," says the director, "we fill up a bathtub. Then we offer a teaspoon, a teacup, and a bucket to the patient and ask him or her to empty the bathtub." "Oh, I understand," says the visitor. "A normal person would use the bucket because it's bigger than the spoon or the teacup." "Not so," says the director. "A normal person would pull the plug out. So, would you like a bed near the window?" Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Moneypants Superpower Hour. We're your hosts, Hannah and Fontaine Judd, and we're the proud parents of 8 sons and 7 daughters, ranging in age from newborn to college student. We're both BYU graduates and the creators of Moneypants. Head on over to CaptainMoneyPants.com to learn more about what we do and what we're all about. We believe every person on this planet has been given at least one superpower to help them accomplish their unique mission in life. But the only way to unlock those superpowers is through work ethic. That's when greatness happens. And that's where Moneypants comes in. Moneypants is the complete tool set for cultivating work ethic in all aspects of a person's life. And today's topic is consequences. Hannah, you had some thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I was talking to a friend and she told me, she said, "Well, I think you guys have too many rules in your family and you're trying to control your kids." And she said, "My parents, they did not have any rules." And I said, "Really?" And she's like, "Yeah, they didn't. And neither do I. I just teach my kids what is right. And I let them make their own decisions because I trust them." And that's what she said to me. And I didn't even know where to begin. There were so many
I'm sorry. Okay,
wrong
first of all,
assumptions.
There's no way her parents did not have any rules.
Well, first off, I'm like, yeah, right. They didn't have any rules.
I know her parents.
Yeah. And so I was like,
whatever.
Okay.
That's just not true. But okay. But yeah, no, you pointed out like, there were a lot. Okay, so there's a lot going on. You got to unpack what she said.
Yeah, it was. I didn't have a punchy line to tell her right there at the moment, so I just kind of
the BS detectors going off.
I'm like, yeah. All I could think was, yeah, right. But she also made other accusations, which I'm going to mention them. One of the accusations was, well, people who make a lot of rules for their kids, those are the kids who go crazy and nuts when they're in college and if they finally are out of the home, or the parents.
They go wild, you mean?
Yeah. And that frustrated me because as a parent, I was like, no, you've got it completely backwards. When you have a child that's nuts, you end up having to put more rules and restrictions because they're always testing the boundaries. Mm-hmm. And yes, those are the kids that go nuts when they leave the home because they no longer have... Because they were pushing the boundaries when they were at home. That's why their parents were pulling their hair out. So that correlational...
Are you speaking from experience?
No, yes, actually. No, I'm not saying I'm going to...
Well, no. Okay, so along those lines, though,
it was just funny that her conclusion was, therefore, rules are bad, and rules, therefore... and consequences, therefore, are what makes a person rebel and behave badly.
We have children, though.
I was just like, oh my goodness.
Hold on. We have children who maybe haven't even gone to college yet, but when they leave home to go to a party or something, different kids, when they're on their own and mom and dad are away, they act differently. And some of our kids are kind of wild and others aren't. And the ones that are more wild, we have to have more rules. So it doesn't necessarily mean... when they leave home to go to college. It wasn't meaning
that the rules made them wild. Okay. Anyway, it was like completely backwards.
So your friend made this, she said that you're just trying to control your kids because you have so many rules. You're just trying to control your kids. And I, being the great person that I am, I just tell my kids what's right and let them make their own decisions. That was her premise.
Okay, and it sounds great, but there are so many flaws and wrong assumptions in that statement that, like I said, I didn't even know where to begin besides to just go, okay, you know what? Do what you want to do. I'm going to do but don't tell me what to do.
Well, okay, but at the same time, though, Hannah, this person, it happens to be very manipulative. And so, unfortunately, because, and maybe she truly believes that she doesn't have any rules, like, I guess, written down rules, but she definitely has rules, only she uses manipulation to make sure her kids do what she wants. And we talked about that at length. Manipulation is always bad. Like, it's not healthy. And remember, we got to go back to the definition.
It's a way of controlling,
yeah,
but that's indirect and dishonest. It's not out there.
Yep. It's an indirect, it's an attempt to control another person through dishonest and disingenuous methods. And we say, especially when it comes to being a parent, but anybody should not use that. That you should not use manipulation. It's a bad thing. It always is because you're being dishonest.
Now, what we don't say, though, is that you should not use control.
Right.
Okay.
Well, we're going to talk about that today.
And that's what we're going to talk about today. Because you're like, wait, you're saying you should be controlling? Well, that's that's what we're going to talk about.
Well, no, because your friend assumed that controlling was wrong. And she assumed that consequences, including punishments, were somehow bad or unnecessary for a parent. When in reality, and I thought you had a really good point here, Hannah, it's merciful. Where controlling your kids is actually an act of mercy. And I guess we'll talk about that in a minute. But the idea was the rules are actually there to help and protect the children, not to limit them or stunt their growth. Or it's actually there. The whole point of having rules and consequences is to protect and help your children,
and
not the
to
other.
Give them more choices in the future. So it's a lot of misunderstandings about why you would have rules, why you would have consequences, and whether or not you even should control your children. So those are the topics we're going to be talking about today.
So, and I like that. That's a good story because it kind of encapsulates a lot of the mentalities that we're dealing with in our age, where people who are trying to raise their kids, especially people with some sort of money pants mentality, they're butting up against these ideas that directly conflict what the whole money pants philosophy is. So, but I want to kind of break it down into some basic categories. I want to start off with some definitions here, Hannah. I want to define consequences. I want to define control. But then I want to talk about the different types of consequences, the logical versus natural consequences. Then I want to kind of segue into what the parent's job is when it comes to establishing these consequences, administering these consequences, and how they work in the family setting, as well as, the ever popular unintended consequences. And then I also want to talk about the difference between control and consequences, like how control differs, but also has some elements of overlap when it comes to consequences. And then we want to talk about kind of the natural progression, how to use consequences and control within the family, and especially with your children as your children grow, and the different stages of progression and age-appropriate consequences. And then I want to talk about specifically logical consequences and how to do them. And then I guess we'll wrap it up with how to use Money Pants and the tools that Money Pants uses. Again, because we harp on this, we say this all the time. Money Pants is a toolbox. It's not just a tool. It's an entire toolbox. All these cool tools inside of Money Pants to help your kids when it comes to consequences, but making good decisions. And that's the end goal, Hannah, when it comes to consequences and rules, is to help your kids become who they can and should be.
And by consequences, we mean rewards as well as punishments.
About that, yeah.
So,
and let's get into that.
A lot of people, yeah. Okay,
we're going to define that.
Defining what consequences even are.
So right off the bat, and we'll go the classic dictionary definition of consequences is the effect result or outcome of something occurring earlier. So in very basic terms, it's the results of your actions.
It's what happens when you make a choice.
It's what happens.
What's going to happen if you do this? What's going to happen if you do that? That's the consequence. But it's not the same as control.
No, and that's just it. Control is, okay, so if a consequence is the result or the outcome of a choice, control is removing choices or to limit choices. And we'll talk about whether that's good or bad here in a minute, but the idea is making choices doesn't mean you get to choose the consequences. And there's a fundamental disconnect in a lot of kids' brains where they think that they don't have to abide by the consequences because of the choices they make. That's wrong.
Or that you're trying to control them by there being consequences, where they want, a lot of times they want their choices to be disconnected from consequences.
Unfortunately, consequences are, not unfortunately, there's nothing fortunate or unfortunate about it. It's just how it is. Consequences are linked to choices. They are the results of your choices. For example, you choose to smoke. You're also choosing to damage your lungs. Simple example, you choose to touch the hot stove, you're choosing to burn your finger. You can't divest the consequences from the action. It's just not how it works. So by choosing one, you are also choosing another.
You can't make a choice and with that choice choose to have the consequences of a different choice.
Right. Well, the classic example
is I pick and choose the consequences that are attached to the choices.
You reap what you sow. The idea is you plant corn, you're going to grow corn. You can't plant corn and expect to grow watermelon. That's not how it works.
Yeah, you can't choose a different consequence from the choice that you make.
And all choices have consequences attached, whether positive or negative. And that's the thing, we're going to talk about that. The consequences could be positive or they could be negative. The consequences are not necessarily negative things. So, for example, you work out, you get stronger. That's a positive consequence. So, and it's the parents' job to help kids learn to link their choices with consequences, to understand that your choices have consequences and what those consequences may be. That's your job as a parent.
Yeah, so whenever you're teaching your kids, when you say, hey, your job is to teach your kids, that's what you're teaching. That's one of the main things you're teaching your kids is, hey, you make this choice, there's this consequence. You make that choice, there's that consequence. And that way they're able to make decisions once they understand that. It was important for us to define consequences because parents don't want to say the word punishment. And so a lot of times they'll substitute the word consequences for punishment. And so the word consequences has kind of taken on this meaning of, oh, it's a punishment because it's a nicer way of saying punishment. But in reality, a consequence is any result of any choice that you make, whether good or bad. So it can be good, it can be bad. It depends on what the choice was.
So let's talk a little bit about the different types of consequences. There are basically two types of consequences. There are logical and there are natural. The natural consequences are the things they're ideal because that's just how the world works. For instance, if you jump off a cliff, you're going to fall down. The natural consequences of gravity kick in. If you jump into a swimming pool or into the ocean or into a lake, you're going to get wet. Those are natural consequences. If you don't brush your teeth are going to rot. These are all natural consequences. The problem with natural consequences is that the outcome is typically more permanent and also a lot more harsh. And the damage could potentially be a lot worse. Logical consequences, on the other side, are the ones that you set up. And this is what parents do on a regular basis, where little Johnny, if you eat your vegetables, you can have dessert after the meal. Or if you do your homework, you'll get good grades. If you finish all your jobs for the week, you can go to your friend's house. Those are logical consequences, that something you've thought through. It's not a natural consequence that you get to have dessert. It's a logical consequence of, hey, if you do this, we've decided. A logical consequence is when you decide.
Yeah.
If you eat your vegetables, you can have dessert.
The natural consequence of eating your vegetables is, hey, you'll be healthier. Mm-hmm. And the natural consequence of not eating your vegetables is, hey, your health, your immune system, it's going to go downhill. Mm-hmm. But a lot of parents will set up a logical consequence to encourage their kids to eat their vegetables on a regular basis.
And let's talk about that. That's actually the next part we wanted to discuss was what is the parent's job when it comes to consequences. And that's just it. It's the job and the duty of parents to nurture and teach their children. You hear that, you know that, but you're like, yeah, but how? Well, one of the big things is to encourage our kids to make good choices and discourage them from making bad choices. So, and that's just it. Encouraging and discouraging is not the same as controlling, Hannah. Kids still have choices, and it's not manipulative because you're being straightforward about what you want your kids to do. I don't want you to do blank, and in order to encourage you to do the right thing, I'm willing to give you blank.
Right. And so what you're saying is hey, I don't want you to run in this street because you might get hit by a car.
Great.
Okay. So you're being very straightforward about why it is, you're doing what you're doing. And that's the actual real reason. And then you're saying...
there's no dishonesty there.
Yeah. However, if you choose to run in the street, this is what I'm going to do.
You won't be allowed to go outside anymore. Or
yeah,
you won't be able to go to the park. You won't be able to play with your friends. Or I'm going to take your bike away.
Or I'm going to take your bike away. And so that's what you as the parent do. So there's that teaching moment of explaining what the actual reason is, and then saying, okay, this is the consequence I'm going to attach because we want to avoid that natural consequence there.
Exactly. And that's just it, Hannah. I like how you said that because you want to teach your children the natural consequences, but encourage them with the logical consequences. So, example, like you said, Billy, Johnny, Sally, whoever you are, I want you to eat your broccoli. And we're going to do an anatomy lesson. And here are all the medical benefits of eating your broccoli. And there are the health benefits and the nutrition and blah, blah, blah. And here's how your body uses it. And you're going to explain all those natural consequences. And if you don't, here are the things you're going to be missing out on. You're not going to have a balance, blah, blah, blah. And your body won't develop these things right. And there'll be these health issues. Like you explain all the natural consequences. But then you say, then you introduce logical consequences where you say, so if you eat your broccoli, you can have a treat after dinner. And that's how you encourage the kids to avoid the negative aspects of the natural consequences. Because that's what you want. You want to help your kids, encourage them to make good choices, but informed choices too, where they know the why, they know the background, they know the logic, they know the reasoning, but then they have this extra motivation using logical consequences to actually make the right choice.
And with that said, there are good, better, best ways to encourage the behavior. And there are better ways to encourage your kid to eat broccoli.
And we're going to talk about going to extremes.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that later because they found that, a better way to encourage them to eat their broccoli is to set it up this way or set it up that way. And so there are good, better, best ways, but that's the whole underlying idea is to set up something that they can understand right away. Because your 5-year-old, they may not understand that, oh gosh, my body's going to break down. They're not going to be able
nutrition.
They're not going to be able to see those results for a while, or connect those results to their actions. And so the whole purpose of you setting up these logical consequences is they're more immediate. They're more, your child can comprehend them better. But at the same time, you're teaching them the actual reason. The actual reason is, hey, this is for your health.
And that further distance you from manipulation. Like you're being even more honest.
Yeah.
You're not just saying what you want. You're saying why you want it. Like it's just this whole idea of rules and consequences being manipulative is just nonsense. Like if you set it up correctly, it is not manipulative and nor is it, and we'll talk about, I guess, control here in a minute, but I like what you said too, Hannah, where logical consequences are more immediate and they're easier for kids to understand. Like a 5-year-old, they don't get it, but like a junior high kid, and they're getting involved with the wrong social group or they're neglecting their studies, or because it becomes popular when you're in junior high to kind of rebel against your parents, and maybe you're getting sexually active and maybe you're dabbling in drugs and you're neglecting your studies, and there's a lot of just very unfortunate social peer pressure at that age. And the kids at that age, they can't see the future, even 10 years down the road, even 5 years or 1 year down the road of what these are, what's going to happen. And so they're more worried about fitting in and doing what everybody else is doing. They're not thinking about college, which is like an eternity away. They're not even thinking about high school or getting a job. And grades don't matter. And so the parents would sit the kid down and say, okay, well, here are the consequences of doing drugs, or here are the consequences of, being sexually active, or here are the consequences of neglecting your grades. This is what's going to happen. But then they should set up a series of logical consequences of, well,
that are immediate.
If you neglect your grades, we're going to pull you out of school and homeschool you. Or if you get into drugs, we're going to put you in rehab. Or if you start becoming sexually active, we're going to take away your social media, or your mobile device, or your access to the internet. These are logical consequences to help the kid avoid the negative aspects, the negative and very harsh aspects of the natural consequences.
Yeah, as you were talking, it reminded me of once I was listening to the Dr. Laura talk show, and it was adults that were calling in talking about how they could never have a relationship and they could never get married and have children because of dumb decisions they had made in junior high and high school where they had contracted permanent STDs. So, and having to tell the people that they were dating that, hey, I have this STD and I would give that to you, or I will never be able to have children, was just so humiliating. And it was so disappointing that, they had made this dumb decision when they were younger, and they were having to deal with
13?
it. They were having to deal with it for the rest of their life. And it was just... were they really able to comprehend that when they were 13? No.
Think about your own self when you were 13. What did you understand at that age? And did you understand what it would be like when you're 30? Were you even thinking about the possibility of you couldn't even comprehend being 30, let alone what your current actions, how that would affect when you're 30. So, but it reminds me though too, Hannah, of when I was, I don't know, maybe I was 6, and I was visiting my grandpa's farm. And my uncle, who worked there, he had a 3-wheeler, and I really wanted to ride it. And he's like, "Okay, well, make sure you don't turn too quickly, or it'll tip over." And 3-wheelers were known for doing that. And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And 6-year-old me, first of all, I had no concept of inertia and the ideas of physics. And so, of course, first thing I do is I push on the throttle, zip around. I'm like, "Wait, this is so much fun!" And then, of course, I get to the end where I'm like, "Uh-oh, I need to turn." And of course, I turn too quickly. It tips over. And it burned my leg or whatever. And it's like, well, he probably should have not, first of all, given me the opportunity to ride it, but also probably should have given me some more parameters. Like, what does it mean to go too fast? And what's going to happen if I crash? He didn't explain all those things, but even if he had, would my 6-year-old brain have actually understood? It probably would have been better for him to take it a little more slowly to see how well I ride to begin with.
Yeah, ride it with you first. And
exactly.
Yeah.
So rather than just throwing me on there and letting me go. And that also reminds me though, because I did some interviews with some very, very rich people. And there was this one guy talking about his son. And his son was like, "You know what? I'm tired of school." He was like 14. He's like, "I'm tired of school. I'm dropping out." And his dad said, "You know what? Your mom and I talked about it, and we've determined that you're not at the age where you can make that decision. And we refuse to let you, at your current age, we're not going to let you fail."
Yeah, we can talk about maybe getting you into a different school.
Or changing things up.
But we're actually not going to allow you to fail at this point in your life. It has too many consequences that will take away too much from you in the future.
Well, and I guess that kind of leads into very nicely to the whole idea, and I love this, and we see this all the time, Hannah, this idea of unintended consequences, where I read the paper and I see, businesses make these decisions, and then there are unintended consequences of that decision, or politicians or they pass a law that have unintended consequences where they're like, oh, I meant it for this to happen.
For example, when I think it was California, they passed a law saying, okay, you can only sell light bulbs that are fluorescent light bulbs, and it's going to be great for the environment. But then they didn't think about the fluorescent light bulbs had mercury in them, and that the mercury would end up in the landfills. It would get leached into the water, and this mercury in the water would end up damaging
the ecosystem, the wildlife.
It would damage the quality of the water we were drinking, and it would damage the wildlife. And so it was an unintended consequence of this law. The law was designed to, hey, we're going to, and they've done other things like, hey, they outlawed paper bags for a while and said plastic bags. And then they realized that the plastic bags were worse than, because they wanted to save trees.
Right.
But so instead we had all these plastic bags, and the plastic bags didn't decompose, and they ended up choking. Wildlife would get end up suffocating
and filling up the landfill, and
and so those are unintended consequences of a law where the intention was to improve the environment, and there were consequences that they hadn't thought through.
So we see that a lot in the world today. Well, kids are no different, where they don't think things through. So, for instance, I'll give you a couple examples. Like a kid will jump in the pool, and the logical consequences or the natural consequences, they're going to get wet.
Oh no, you push somebody in the pool.
Okay,
you're being silly, and you push someone in the pool.
You push your friend in the pool. The natural consequence is they're going to get wet. Everybody knows that. Haha, that's funny. The unintended consequence, though, is that the friend's phone is now ruined because it was in their back pocket when you push them in the pool. Now you're on the hook for whatever, $500-$600 for a new phone. Whoops. It's an unintended consequence of one of your actions. Or another example would be, a teenager gets their new car or whatever, and they're racing around, and they're all worried about getting pulled over by the cops and getting a ticket. They know that's a possibility. But the unintended consequence that they're not considering is whether or not they're going to hit a kid who's out playing in the street, and they're not able to stop in time. Where you had that I believe a cousin who did just that, where he had this really cool race car or truck or something like that, was going 60, 70 miles an hour in the residential.
Through his neighborhood, yes.
And it was super fun, and he was on the lookout for the cops, but didn't think it through and didn't think, oh, what if a kid ran out into the street? Would I be able to stop? No. I wouldn't. And then he would have to deal with the consequences of hitting, hurting, and maybe even killing a little kid. Like, how devastating would that be? And so all of a sudden, the law of a speed limit of 20 or 15 or 25 or whatever it is makes a lot of sense. It's not protecting. It's not a restriction on him. It's actually protecting him from hurting something and protecting him from unintended consequences. So, and then of course, there's the other example. I read this in the paper. Boy, it's been probably a decade now, but there were these kids, and they goofing around, and they threw a frozen turkey at a passing car, thinking it'd be funny. Like, I don't know, like kids throw rocks at things. They just weren't thinking. They threw a frozen turkey at a passing car. It smashed through the windshield, hit the lady, caused her all sorts of damage. She had to get facial reconstruction. I think she ended up crashing her car as well. The glass and the lacerations on her face, like it caused all sorts of damage. And he ended up having to do, this was a criminal offense, is what he ended up having to go to court. And this lady had all these medical bills, and there was a criminal investigation, like all these consequences that he was thinking he was just having fun, and didn't think about the unintended consequences of, oh, I could really hurt somebody, and he did. And it's a very sweet story, though, because the lady, she worked with the judge to make sure that the kid got minimal sentence, and she worked with the kid to say, hey, I want you to learn from this and become better because of this. And it's actually a really cool story. But the idea is, though, that he had to deal with things that were, these consequences were pretty severe and pretty harsh. And he didn't even once consider it because he was just out having fun with his friends. I think he was like 16. So with consequences, with logical consequences, the idea is for parents to help protect their kids from the harsh realities of natural consequences. And so when you're creating those logical consequences, you want to consider immediate. You want to explain immediate, but also long-term effects of, hey, you're little Johnny, you're going to make this decision. Here's what's going to happen immediately, but also here's what could happen down the road if you pursue this course of action or if you make this choice. So I guess we've already kind of touched on it, but that leads into the whole idea of control versus consequences, where the whole speed limit thing, people, boy, they bristle, they hate it. Oh, it's a restriction. But no, as we discussed, Hannah, it's a protection, not only for you, but for other people as well. And that's these rules and these laws are in place to help everybody. And so that's the idea is we want to control our children. And this is going to sound really funny. And I've heard, well, your friend, oh, you controlling your children. You're just such a bad parent. Whoa, no, time out, stop. What? We totally disagree. We 100% disagree. Not only do you control your children, you should control your children.
Well, and here's why. When your kids are born, you're controlling them 100%. If you've had an infant, you decide when they eat, when they sleep, you pick them up, you carry them where they're going, you put them in their car seat. They don't make any decisions.
They don't decide where you're going.
No, there are very few decisions they make. They can make the decision whether to cry or not.
Maybe.
And so, but they're 100% your responsibility in your control.
Yeah.
And
but that's, I guess I want to back up just a little bit before we get into that, where we hear this phrase. I think it's funny because when you're out in public and your child is doing something, that you'll hear this. You'll say, "Get your children under control. Get your child under control."
Or your kids are out of control.
Yeah, where it's
my gosh, your kids are totally out of control.
My kids are climbing up the fence or climbing a baseball diamond. They're climbing up the backstop or whatever. And somebody say, "Hey, your kids are out of control. Get your kids under control." Well, wait a minute. I thought we weren't supposed to control our children. I thought that was a bad thing. Like there's this societal hypocrisy of you're supposed to control your children, but you're not supposed to control your children. And it's like, well, wait, which one is it? Am I supposed to have my children under control? Are they supposed to be under control? Or am I not? Is it supposed to be hands off and hey,
so basically
not control my children at all? Which is it?
Parents are in a no-win situation because if your kids are doing something somebody else doesn't like, they're like, you're not controlling your kids. But if you're doing something they disagree with, they say you're controlling.
Yeah.
Like, you should, if you say, hey, my kids aren't allowed doing sleepovers.
You're so controlling.
You're controlling because they want your kid to, come to the sleepover, So, you're not going to win either way. So basically you need to make up your own mind what you're going to do, because if you rely on society, you'll just get really mixed messages, and it's hypocritical, but so you have to just do your own thing.
Well, at the same time though, I think we can all agree, though, you should control your children, especially as you were saying, Hannah. When you're starting off and your kid is a newborn, you do control them 100%. They don't get to decide whether or not they want to put on a seatbelt. They don't get to decide where they live. They don't get to decide. They don't get to decide whether or not
to wear a diaper or if they're going to eat or not, or they're not the ones making these calls.
But the idea is that, by control, and by the time they're 2 years old, maybe they're making more decisions, but you're still very controlling. And again, going back to, they don't get to decide whether or not to wear a seatbelt. They don't get to decide when mealtime is. They don't get to decide the menu. They don't get to decide when bedtime is. It's not their decision. Unfortunately, and
it's your responsibility.
It's your decision.
It's not their responsibility. It's your responsibility. You're going to be held responsible for if your child is neglected and unhealthy. That's going to be your responsibility. Yeah, therefore, you are the one who needs to control it.
Yeah, let's flip it around. What if you don't control your 2-year-old? What if you never give them a bedtime, never make them eat anything, let them do whatever they want? What's going to happen? CPS is going to be knocking at your door, taking your child away is what's going to happen, because they're going to be over in the neighbor's pool and they're going to be filthy and they're going to be malnourished. And the CPS is going to show up and say, you are a horrible parent.
This child is neglected.
This child is severely neglected, malnourished, and dangerous.
By not controlling your child, that equates neglect.
And I guess that's the thing, though, is this idea that manipulation is when you're controlling somebody. No, I want to harp on that. I want to be very clear on this. Manipulation is trying to control. Yes, that's half the definition, but the other half is using dishonest methods. So controlling your children is not the same as manipulation, nor is it the same as consequences. So we're just kind of defining this here. Control is limiting their access to negative natural consequences. That when we talk about control, that's what we're talking about. And
it's limiting their choices.
Yeah. And is it bad?
Or taking them away completely.
Yeah. Is that bad? Isn't control always bad? No. No, not at all. Matter of fact, as we said, it's necessary, because if you don't do it, all sorts of bad things will happen. And I guess I think some examples might be better where, you can't always allow natural consequences to teach. Natural consequences are the best teacher because it's nature teaching, and nature is very harsh and there's no wiggle room when it comes to nature. You drive your car off the cliff, nature's going to be like, okay, gravity, it kicks in, off you go. Like, there's no negotiating. There's no, well, you didn't know about gravity, so I'll let you off this time. No, nature doesn't work that way. Nature is very harsh, and it's the best teacher, but it's also very dangerous to let your children learn solely from nature. You want to soften that up a bit, and that's where.
Yeah, and that's why we say that when you attach consequences that are logical, it's actually merciful, because yeah, you don't. You're saying, hey, look, you're too young to deal with these natural consequences. They're extreme. They're permanent. Yeah, you'll have brain damage. You'll be dead.
Yeah.
That's a little too harsh for, making a stupid mistake in year 2, So let's soften that up, and let's put some, either apply control and not let you have choices, or limit the choices and attach consequences to disobeying me when I say don't go in the street.
Well, for instance, your 6-year-old wants to play with the table saw. Oh, that's okay, because they want to,
I told them they might cut their hand off.
I let natural consequences take the toll. And now we're in the hospital, and the doctors are frantically trying to put the finger back on. It's like,
why were you letting your child play with a table saw?
Guess who else is going to be there? The police. And they're going to be filing a report for gross negligence. Why in the world were you letting your 6-year-old play with a table saw?
Well, I explained to him, officer, and I told him what would happen if he did it, and he chose. And
he said he understood.
I wanted to let him have his own choices, so I let him play with it. No, ma'am.
But this, okay, so let's take another example would be your 4-year-old wants to try out the shotgun. And it's like, well, okay, there's this whole issue. Okay, well, I explained to him, there's going to be kickback, and if you point it at something, you're going to destroy it. And if you point it at somebody, you may, you could hurt them or maybe kill them, but okay.
That's what he wanted to do, and I didn't want to, limit his choices.
I don't want to control my children. What a horrible idea. And next thing you know, you're burying your dog or worse, So, or how about, your 2-year-old wants to play with the blender. There's another example. Like, and what 2-year-old doesn't? I mean, it's kind of a cool thing. It's got gears and things that spin around, and you can make. They see mom use it all the time. And I want to make a smoothie. I'm hungry.
Well, referring back to this friend we mentioned at the beginning, where she's like, oh, well, I just explain to them, and I just teach them, and I let them make their own choices. Well, I told, using that same logic, I told my 2-year-old that if he played with the blender, he might chop off, a finger or two. But, he wanted to go ahead and do it. So I let him. It was his choice.
Good grief.
Nope. Okay. That doesn't fly. You're responsible for that. You can't give him that choice.
Right.
So yes, you need to control him. And granted, accidents happen. I'm not talking about accidents. Accidents happen to everybody. But me saying, well, I'm not going to tell him no. I'm just going to explain to him. But no's a bad word. And I'm not going to attach any consequences. I'm not going to try to control him. No, you should try to control your 2-year-old and not let him play with the blender.
Yeah. Here's another one. How about my 8-year-old wants to get married?
Well, it was her choice.
Yeah, I explained to her, okay, you could get pregnant, and then you're going to be responsible for a baby, and you got to make sure you have a full-time job to be able to buy food, and you got to have your own place to stay, and your husband, he bet, he's
You got to pick a good guy. And
an 8-year-old can't make that choice.
They don't know enough to make a decision
Not only that, but
like that.
Are they emotionally, mentally, physically capable of dealing with the consequences of that decision?
No
way.
Not even close.
No way. So, you do need to control your children, and you can't always let natural consequences take their toll. For instance, you got a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old running in the street and a car's coming. Do you give them the choice? Say, hey, Johnny, a car's coming. When it hits you, it's probably going to break your legs, maybe give you some sort of brain damage. You're going to be in the hospital. It's going to be very expensive for the family. I'd like you to get out of the street, please. Are you going to give them that choice, Hannah?
No.
Hey, I explained it to them. It's their choice. I'm not controlling my children. Heavens no, you're going to run into the street. You're going to grab the little bugger out of the street. And you're going to take him back to the house. Then you might explain a few things to him, but you are going to control him, coerce him, force him to do the right thing because you're not going to give him that choice. And so when we say control is a good thing, that's what we're talking about. You're going to limit the choices and thus limit the negative consequences of those choices in order to protect your children. It's actually an act of mercy. So, and that reminds me, Hannah,
like for example, we set dating rules for our teens where we say, hey, you can date when you're 16, but we expect it to be group dates. We don't want you going off alone with a boy or a girl. And when you're 18 and you've moved out of the house, you can have a boyfriend or girlfriend and have, more serious relationships. But any time before 16, you're not quite ready for that. You're not ready for all the drama, first off. But even between 16 and 18, yeah, we're starting to get you ready. We're preparing you and ramping up for, having more serious relationships. But we're going to start out with the group dates because we don't want you in a serious relationship. Because if you were to get pregnant or make, unintended, where that's not something you could deal with.
Physically, emotionally, financially.
Yeah. And I know people are like, oh, well, they can get an abortion. Is that something I've had friends where their kids have gotten abortions and it has left them mentally, emotionally damaged. Scarred. And it's not, that's not a decision a kid that age should be making.
Fair.
Should I kill the baby? Should I keep the baby? These are really harsh, real world decisions where, they're not quite ready to be making that. If there's something you can put in place, rules and stuff you can put in place that maybe we can avoid that.
Yeah.
That's merciful.
Yeah.
That's an act of mercy. It's not because, I don't trust my kid and I don't. No, it's because if they make a bad choice, it's not a choice they're prepared. They're economically, emotionally, or physically prepared to deal with.
Yeah.
And so that's why you make rules like that it's an act of mercy.
Exactly. Well, kind of reminds me of our first grader. We had a young child who did not like...
When we were young parents, yeah.
Did not like wearing underwear, would wear dirty clothes, and refused to do her hair.
And let me tell you, this child, you'll have kids, I don't want to wear that, or I don't know. This child would full on fight me in the morning. And I was a young mom, just in my early 20s. This kid would fight me, like fight me in the morning. She's just a little kid.
Her underwear or
trying to get underwear on this child was ridiculous. She didn't want me to touch her hair. She wanted to wear the same dirty shirt she had worn for, every single day and had been digging out in this yard with. It had holes and was very adamant that that's what she wanted to do. And she was willing to bite, kick, scratch, do whatever to not have to wear the clothes clean clothes. Bits and underwear.
And to look nice.
Underwear.
Here's the neat thing, though, Hannah, because a couple of years before that, we had heard this one psychologist who had given us a lot. We had listened to all of his stuff, and he had said, let natural consequences take their toll. That was his thing. is because it's the best teacher. And we're like, okay. And his idea was, if your teenage son has, bad breath and there's green stuff growing on there and he just, he's basically vomiting a horrible stench every time he opens his mouth, let him go. Don't nag him about brushing his teeth because
don't ruin your relationship when natural consequences can teach him.
Some cute girl at school will come up to him and say, dude, your breath stinks. The next thing you know, he's going to be brushing those pearly whites. He's like, so just let the natural consequences, let the school, society straighten them out. And we're like, okay, we're going to do that with this daughter of ours, this first grader. We're going to send her off to school.
Yeah, because I was having this fight every morning.
Nappy
and so I was
clothes
like,
and
okay.
nappy hair, and off she goes. And that was a huge mistake.
I realized really quickly, I picked her up from school. I'm like, she didn't care.
And neither did
her friends. They were, 7 years old, 6 years old. They didn't care.
They didn't straighten her out at all.
No.
All that happened was she looked like she was
neglected.
She looked like a homeless child.
Yeah, and so we're like,
and unfortunately, she was being treated like that, like a homeless child.
Yeah, and so it was a reflection on me of, hey, why aren't you brushing your kid's hair? Why aren't you putting clean clothes on her? You just dump her off at school in a mess. And so I was like, nope. Okay, that was either bad advice or advice that wasn't explained well. And just because the person had a PhD, let's talk about reality here. That didn't work out.
It didn't.
And you don't need to try that out because I'm telling you, that was a bad idea. I tried it for you and it was a bad idea. So what is the right thing to do though?
Well, I think a better solution, Hen, would be to maybe start out smaller and give our first grader maybe allow her to make some smaller choices to show that she was able to make the larger choices.
Say, you can choose between this outfit or this outfit.
Yeah.
You can choose any of your clothes that are washed and clean, but you can't choose...
We shouldn't have let her make that choice until she showed she could make similar, responsible, good choices on her own first.
You can choose which hairstyle I do on your hair. You want braids or a ponytail or this little cute bun? Which one do you want here? Make a decision here, but you're not allowed making the decision not to brush your hair. You're not allowed making the decision to not wear underwear. You can go buy the underwear you like. But you're not allowed making the decision not to wear underwear. You're not allowed making the decision to wear dirty or torn clothes. That's where we're drawing the line. So the issue is, where do you draw the line? I guess I'll throw a few more just examples out there. Where do you draw the line when it comes to power tools, or to knives, or to using the lawnmower, or to guns, or to swimming, or to riding a bike to the store by yourself? Or where do you draw the line when it comes to dating or driving? Like, at what point? And I think it'll become abundantly obvious when we talk about this, but is it okay for your 4-year-old to drive? Well, no. Everyone would answer with a resounding no. They can't even reach the pedals. Oh, good. Well, we got blocks on their feet. We can put them on there and put them in a booster seat. Okay, yeah, maybe they can. No 4-year-old should be driving a car. And should your 6-year-old be using the lawnmower? Like it's a riding mower. I don't know. Maybe. Probably not. Yeah, but the thing is you will never, ever, ever, like you're not going to see age guidelines for these things, because here's the problem is some of my kids could do those things at earlier ages. And other children of mine, I'm like, you're old, but you're still not ready to do this activity or this because you haven't even learned how to do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And so we start out controlling our kids completely.
Right. Okay, let's talk about the progression.
Yeah.
Like how it works.
And as they show that they're able to make, you start giving them little choices and little responsibility. And as they prove they can make good choices within that realm, then you can add on more choices. And more choices that are bigger choices that have bigger consequences.
So I heard it explained this way, is that you start out with your children very strict. And you gradually remove those restrictions the older they get. That's the idea. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, and this is what happens, is parents do the opposite. They start off with these mentalities of never tell your child no, and you're just trying.
Let them be a kid and let them make up.
So what happens is parents start off not giving the kids any restrictions, and then by the time they're teenagers, the parents are going, "Oh my gosh, my kid's out of control, and I better clamp down now." And then the kids rebel, and it's this power struggle and this fight. Whereas the opposite should be correct, where you start off strict and slowly remove the restrictions, so that by the time they leave home, they're already making all their own decisions anyway. Like that's the ideal.
Well, as I was saying, like as you give them, like, say, okay, well, you're able to do this and this. Hey, I'm going to let you, next time they come and ask you, oh, well, can I try this or do this? Say, well, hey, you've been doing this, this, and this. Yeah, I'm willing to let you try that.
Yeah.
Within certain bounds. Oh, yeah, you can ride your bike down the street to here. Let's see how you do with that. But that will determine, and once they show that they can make good choices with their new freedom, then you can move on from there. But if they make bad choices, you have to pull it back a notch.
Well, okay, so I want to define freedom too.
Yeah.
Freedom is nothing more or less than the ability to make choices. That's all. Mm-hmm. And you want to start off giving your children very little. You want to give them very little freedom until they show they can make those good choices, and then you increase the freedom. Because they've already proven, not only to you, but to themselves, that they can make the right choice. And they know what it feels like to make the right choice. And there's that whole idea of confidence of doing the right thing when you know what the right thing is.
But you can, once you can trust your kids, then you can say, okay, here's a bigger choice that has bigger consequences. Now back to this friend where she's like, well, I noticed that people who have really strict rules, their kids are the ones that go nuts when they're at college. Well, every once in a while, you'll have a kid who you give them an inch, they go a mile, type of thing where if you give them, okay, I'm going to trust you to do this, and they just, they misuse it every time, you end up not being able to give them more choices. Right. And it's sad, and you end up having to be stricter with them because you're still responsible for them, but you're not actually able to give them the more and more choices. Because
it would be bad for them.
Yeah.
You'd be doing them a disservice by giving them more opportunities and choices, because they'll just make more bad choices.
Yeah, they've got to show that they can make good choices with the freedom that they have. And if they can't have more choices. Not while you're still responsible for them, because then you are the irresponsible one. You're the one held responsible. Mm-hmm. And so...
Because it's called teaching and training your kids. That's your job. If you have children, this is literally your job description.
Yeah.
That's it.
Now, and I've heard it described as a trust bank.
Sure.
Is, hey, you've got to build up your trust bank. Once you show you can do this, I can trust you more, and we can start adding things in. Oh, you made a mistake. I got to pull. Your trust bank went down a bit, so we're going to pull back. But you can build it back up if you keep making good choices. And so that's the concept there.
Yeah.
And ideally, if your kid, for the most part, keeps making good choices, by the time they're 18, they're almost making all their own choices anyway. And so when you let them go at 18, it's not really going to be a big deal for them.
Yeah.
And they're going to be very responsible, and they're going to be ready to make their own choices. But if they've been rebelling against the rules and rebelling, and you let them go, well, they're going to have to deal with the consequences, but it's on them at that point.
Yeah.
It's not, there's not anything you can legally do about that.
Exactly.
They may not be ready to leave home, but it's not because, you didn't have due diligence on your part. It's their choice.
And that's the idea, is to gradually, starting at 0 when they're newborn, gradually increasing that level of freedom until they're in, the 90-something percent, 80, 90%, so that when they leave home and they're 100% responsible and they're officially an adult, it's not a huge shock to them. But at the same time, they will have that confidence of knowing what good decisions feel like, and they have kind of that habit ingrained already. And it's not a linear thing. It's not like every year you add 5% freedom. Well, and typically it's pretty restricted until they become teenagers and the brain starts to develop, and the freedoms come a little faster at that point. And it's really cool. Now, the neat thing is every kid is different. And you can actually put your kids in what's known as a positive time warp, where they actually have more freedom than their peers because they've made more good decisions than their peers. And you can actually give them that positive time warp of, your 12-year-old has more sense and more responsibility and more confidence than a 20-year-old because they've been making those good decisions over and over again, and you've gradually increased their level of freedom.
Well, as you were talking about that, I thought of when I was 18 and I went off to college, I went through this realization that there were no more logical consequences. Like I no longer had.
Mom and dad weren't there?
I no longer had a mom and dad watching what I was doing. If I didn't do this, nobody cared. If I ate ice cream for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, nobody cared. Nobody was going to say boo.
Wait, didn't you eat cold cereal for breakfast?
Yes, I ate cold cereal for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And after one semester, I felt so terrible. First off, I gained like 40 pounds. But
what cereal were you eating?
I was eating cornflakes. It was terrible.
Were you allergic to corn?
No, it was probably GMO corn. I don't know.
40 pounds.
But it was terrible. I felt terrible. So the next semester, I'm like, I don't know how to cook well, but I started making vegetables and incorporating fruit and vegetables. And I started getting healthier and feeling better just from that one step of, okay, I'm going to eat something other than cornflakes and make a concerted effort to make something that looked like a meal that maybe my mom would make. But there were other things like, hey, nobody cares if I go to church. Nobody cares if I read my scriptures. Nobody's there watching me anymore. Yeah. What happens if I just don't do that? And, and realizing, I don't like how that feels.
See, you should have gotten that out of your system when you were much younger.
I should have, but
that's the idea with Moneypants is to let them make those mistakes when they're younger.
When you let kids go at college, I was always a very good kid, but just the realization that nobody was watching me anymore made me go, well, wait. It made you question, because at that point you have to decide who you want to be.
Yeah.
And so we would always, which is funny because this was the friend that I mentioned at the beginning. We had this conversation actually as part of it. As I said, I had mentioned I don't know how it led to this, but I was saying, hey, my husband and I, we don't believe in getting in serious relationships till you're out of the house because you don't actually even know who somebody is until they leave home.
Yeah.
Because at that point, that's when they make their own decisions. And that's when you find out who you really are. You don't know who you really are till you're making your own decisions. And so I'm like, yeah, you really, you don't want to be making decisions like that. And of course, the person disagreed with me totally. But that's why, is because I knew for myself, here I had been, this great student, this really good kid, and just moving off on my own in that realization that, hey, you know what? Nobody's watching me anymore. Nobody cares. I'm thousands of miles from home. I'm making my own decisions. Who is it that I want to be? I get to make up my own mind now completely. And at that point, you find out, this is who I really am.
Well, but that goes back to this whole idea of freedom, where if freedom is the ability to make choices, then in order to give your children more freedom, it requires a proportional amount of responsibility, meaning you've shown that you can make those good choices. Freedom, and you'll hear this, and freedom isn't free. There's a lot of truth to that, where the more freedom you have, the more responsibility you have as well, and the harsher the consequences for making a bad decision, but also the greater the rewards for making good decisions. So freedom is this kind of this funnel where you continue to make bad decisions and it restricts your freedom, whereas you continue to make good choices and you get more and more choices and more opportunities. And I guess that's another podcast, prepping your teen for leaving home. And we'll talk about that in the future. But the whole idea is the more freedom, the more responsibility, or the Batman or Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. Same concept. With great freedom comes great responsibility. And again, it goes back to that dad we were talking about earlier, where his 14-year-old son wanted to drop out of school and the dad said no. we're not willing to let you fail. We're not willing to give you that level of responsibility.
You're too young. You're too young to make that decision to fail.
And so here's the big crux. This is the exciting part, is how do you determine? How do you decide when the kid can have more responsibility? And this is it. You simply look at their age. If they're 8, they're able to make the decisions. By the time they're 16, they can make the decisions in 18, 100%. Basically, you take their age, multiply it by 10, and that's the level of responsibility that they should have. No, not at all. Not even close. There is no, first of all, every kid is different. So that totally doesn't work. There are no hard and fast rules for any kid. Every kid is completely different. And so how do you do it? How do you determine, like Sally, she's way more responsible than Billy, and Billy's older. How do you determine who gets what responsibilities and how much freedom and all that? And this is it. It's very simple. This is how to determine the age appropriateness of an activity, is the consequences. Age appropriate consequences. In other words, if the consequences would be appropriate, the negative consequences of, and I'm talking the logical and natural, if the consequences for a bad choice are age appropriate, then it's probably okay to let your child have that choice. And we talked about this before, your 2-year-old playing with the blender. No, not age appropriate, because the consequences would be more than a 2-year-old can handle. Letting your 10-year-old date. No, because the potential consequences of you misusing that are too great. Letting your 13-year-old drive, again, or letting your 5-year-old have a gun, or whatever it may be, you have to look at the potential negative consequences of a bad decision and weigh those against their age.
And then
is it age appropriate?
And then the other factor is to look at what responsibilities you've given them up to that point, leading up to it, and determining, hey, did they make good choices with that? Did they make good choices with that? Did they make good choices with that? Because, even if you're looking at the consequences, is there ever an age appropriate time to, lop off your hand,
No, but when you're working construction and you're 18 years old or 20 years old, and that's a possibility, at the very least, you would be able to handle it. You have insurance, or you have some schooling, you've got some understanding of, the consequences of that, and you'll be more careful.
Yeah, but your brain development is, part of it is, can you comprehend those things?
Right, exactly.
Can you comprehend because we have some kids, they turn 16. Are they ready to drive yet? Well, they can't even drive the lawnmower straight. So maybe we're just going to hold off on that till you get better at riding your bike safely, or until
Exactly.
Let's work up to it.
But along those lines,
if you can't watch where you're going on your bike, am I going to let you ride a car if you keep crashing into stuff with your bike because you're looking the other way?
Not paying attention.
Or
you're cutting other people off on your bike and making them crash.
Yeah.
Not paying attention to your surroundings. That's a big, I guess, red flag. Maybe.
Yeah. But starting with something that's maybe a lower level, like riding a bike, and going, okay, well, if you can ride this bike well, maybe we can move up to a mini bike, or a little motorized scooter, or riding the lawnmower, or just slowly work our way up.
Well, the thing is that, Hannah, I've found that letting our children use the riding mower, and I supervise, I teach them how to use it. I warn them of the pitfalls, but then I kind of supervise for a little while to make sure they do a good job. And if they show me that they can do a good job at that point, then I'll leave them unsupervised. And if they continue to do a good job, almost inevitably, every one of them who does a good job with the riding mower ends up being a great driver when it comes to the car. And I'd be willing to let them use the car and get a license and drive.
And that's good, because even with the riding mower, we're like, hey, there can't be any kids in the yard.
Yep.
And they're, because of this and that. So they're already thinking about, okay, I could, not running over things that could get hurt.
Not hitting stuff. And, and the thing is, though, sometimes they'll come to me and be like, Dad, I got a problem. And they'll have, gone too close to the swing set and got the lawnmower stuck, or they didn't turn a certain part off and they broke the belt or whatever. I'm like, okay. And I'm logging that one away going, all right, that's a good, first of all, they came to talk to me. So that's a good sign. But like the maturity level, it's really cool to watch them make these mistakes, I guess, and how they correct them in preparation for future responsibilities. And I want to talk about that, where when your kids are growing up and they're under your supervision, that's when you want them to make these mistakes. Because they're going to. We're people. We're human. Everybody makes mistakes. That's the age. Like when your kids are growing up, you want them to make the age-appropriate mistakes so that you can help correct and get them back on their feet.
But you want to do it a little at a time and build up.
So I think a good example would be, again, don't throw your 5-year-old or 6-year-old onto a quad runner and say, have fun, and off they go. No, it may be better to start them off on a bicycle, something that's not powered, and let them get used to that. But at the same time, you should say, you can fall down, you can hurt yourself, I want you to wear a helmet. And then they get on the bike, and sure enough, they fall down. They don't hurt their head, but they skin their elbow. Is that an age-appropriate consequence for learning to ride a bike? Absolutely. That's the whole idea.
It didn't cause permanent damage. It didn't cause brain damage.
Whereas if I throw
they had the helmet on.
But I throw them on a quad runner and they're going 40, 50, 60 miles an hour and they get thrown off, they could have brain damage. They could be seriously hurt. So these freedoms that we give our children, the way to determine whether or not we can give our children these choices and the lack of parental control is to determine if the negative consequences are age appropriate. That's all.
And how they've handled previous responsibilities leading up to it.
So I just wanted to clarify, again, there's this whole concept, we talked about it a minute ago, consequences can be positive or negative, but there's this connotation of negativity, but that's wrong. Consequences, as we said before, are just the results of an action. They can be positive or negative. Doing your homework means you're going to get good grades. And when you get good grades, it means you're going to have more opportunities to choose a better college. And a better college means a better education. A better education means a better job, which gives you more freedom and more opportunities. Like, that's a positive thing. Exercising, you're going to have a healthier heart or stronger muscles or just be better digestion or better sleep, And then there are logical, positive logical consequences of if you get your job done, you get to go to your friend's house, or you get to watch TV, or you get the treat after dinner, or whatever it is.
And those are in place to encourage, or the logical consequences are something you put in place to encourage or discourage your kids from making certain choices
that have harsh natural consequences.
So hopefully you can encourage them to get the great consequences for good decisions, or discourage them from experiencing the harsh consequences of bad decisions.
And that's actually going to be our very next podcast is designing rewards and punishments. How do you do that? Because some people will go extreme and it becomes very controlling, but in a bad way, in that the idea of, I'm going to set up these consequences for my son because I want him to do such and such, and I'm not being manipulative, but here's the consequence. If he doesn't do it, I'm going to restrict him to his bedroom for the next 3 years. Well, that's extreme. We don't want to go with these extreme consequences in order to motivate the right behavior. What's the phrase? I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse. We don't want to go there. That's not what we're about. When we take, and we'll talk, I guess we're going to talk about that the next podcast, about how to properly design rewards and punishments. So let's wrap it up here, Hannah, with how does this this is all part of the Moneypants philosophy, but how do we apply this practically within the Moneypants ecosystem? And we talk about it.
Moneypants, you are setting up consequences. You're setting up rewards.
Yes.
You're setting up, if you watch the podcast about the layered rewards, those are consequences, logical consequences that you're setting up to encourage your children to make good decisions that are going to support them and help them and give them more freedom in the future.
So here they are. Here are some of the tools. You've got family council. That's where you teach your kids the natural as well as the logical consequences. Then you've got cash and the whole money system that we have with Moneypants. Use Job Jar, habits, bonuses, layered rewards, what you just talked about, Hannah, behavior reports, mastery points, and fees. All of those help motivate good choices and to avoid the harsh natural consequences.
And to enjoy the good consequences of developing yourself and making good choices. And so that's really what it's focused on is, hey, reward, reward, reward. Let's lead you down the path where you're getting natural rewards in life.
It becomes
for good decisions.
It becomes a habit to anticipate the reward for good decisions. That's what we're about. The app is designed to help family members think about the consequences of their actions, where if you choose to do your job, you also choose to get paid. You also choose to have nice clothes. You also choose to have enough money for sports. You also choose to have enough money for summer camp. You have all these freedom. You're choosing freedom. And on the flip side, if you choose not to do your job, you also choose to get a fee. You choose to miss out on your soccer team. You choose to miss out on girls' camp. You choose to not join the family for movie night. And you also choose to miss your friend's birthday party. Like we're all about helping the family members, especially our kids, as their brains are developing, to consider the consequences of their actions, good and bad. Because again, all choices have consequences. And so we want our kids to start thinking about their choices in that way, where they're like, what are the consequences? So that when they're on their own, when they're away from home, whether it's they're going off to college or if they're off at summer camp or they're off at school or they're their soccer team or whatever it may be, and mom and dad aren't there, they're thinking about, what would be the consequence of this decision that I'm about to make? And it's really cool, and it's very mature, where they're actually considering, and they've been trained to consider the consequences of their actions. And that whole idea of making rash or unfortunate decisions kind of goes away. And they have this level of maturity about them it's kind of refreshing.
Yeah. And the other thing is with Moneypants, it's within boundaries.
Right.
You're giving them choices within boundary. There is still an element of control that's appropriate.
Age appropriate.
You're not just saying, you can decide to do whatever you want. No, it's within certain boundaries. Mm-hmm. And so it creates a natural bridge to becoming an adult where they're going to have that 100% freedom of making their own choices. It creates a nice little bridge so that they're not, so when they are finally on their own, it's not this punishment. It's not to their detriment.
Yeah.
They're prepared for it. They're prepared to make good decisions on their own, and they're ready for that freedom. It's not going to destroy them. It's going to be a good thing for them and an exciting thing for them. And they're going to feel good about themselves when they're 18 and they're on their own and they understand good decision making skills. And like you said, they're going to be considering consequences. Well, if I do this, this is what's going to happen. If I do that, that's what's going to happen. Whereas a lot of teenagers, a lot of children, there's a disconnect between choices and consequences. Yeah. And so Moneypants, that's the sort of thinking that it engenders is, okay, my choices have consequences attached.
Well, but you also let them make those mistakes and have those little minor failures all growing up so that when they are away from home, they're not going to make those giant mistakes. It's so much better to make the little mistakes.
Well, they're less likely to.
Okay,
they might still decide to do it. They're less likely to. They still can.
Where it's so much better to make a $10 mistake when you're 8 versus a $10,000 mistake when you're in your 20s. Why not make those mistakes, especially when mom and dad are there to kind of help out and go, okay, well, we limited your exposure to the consequences to only being $10. But once you're gone from home, there are no limits to natural consequences. You're exposed to the full nature of the consequences. Like it's out there, and it could crush you.
Yeah, and your parents can't rescue you anymore. Nope. They can't rescue you, and they're no longer responsible. It's like all on you, but we want that to be a good thing.
Yeah. And so it's not that sudden burden of, you're 18, get out.
Yeah,
Wait, what?
It should be actually an exciting thing to be 18 and to finally have that freedom.
Get that last 10%.
It's not supposed to be a punishment and this, okay, you're going to be 100% responsible. It should be, oh my goodness, I get to make my own decisions and make these good decisions on my own.
I'm ready.
I can do this.
Yep.
And so it should be a very positive thing, not a death sentence or something.
Something they dread.
Yeah.
Well, And I guess we see that too, where, 20-somethings, 30-somethings are still living back at home because the real world's too crazy. They're like, I can't.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why
there are other reasons
there are a lot of reasons why people come live back at home, but
that could be one of them.
But we'll just say that in college, you can make a lot of mistakes that.
Not just college, you just go off into the workforce. So some kids don't go to college. Maybe they go to trade school, but 18, 19 out of high school, they go join the workforce, and a lot of mistakes that can be made once they leave home if they haven't been making these decisions all along.
Yeah. Well, for example, you would hopefully have learned to not steal when you're at home within the home environment where the consequences aren't
prison, jail time.
Yeah, it's not prison and jail time. It's,
or you've learned,
that's a fee, or
you've
got to replace that thing,
or you've learned to not hit.
Yeah.
Or he took my thing, or he said something mean to me, so I socked him. Well, you realize that's assault and battery as an adult, and you're going to jail
on your permanent record.
You're probably going to lose your job, and
you're going to have a really hard time getting another job. And these are harsh consequences. But it's how it is. I'm not deciding that. You're not deciding that. It's just that's how it is. So it's just much better to go, hey, you're going to get a fee for that, or you're going to. So they realize, there are consequences to these types of decisions, and hopefully they'll have the self-control or the ability to think about consequences before they act, and can maybe hopefully avoid some of the harshness that society and nature dish out. So
to kind of recap, we've kind of talked about, we defined consequences and how it's not the same as control. We also talked about natural versus logical consequences. We talked about the parents' duties when it comes to implementing the natural versus logical consequences. Especially when it comes to, unintended consequences. We talked about control versus consequences, where, you start out controlling your kids and you want to slowly release that as they get older. We talked about the natural progression of how a kid gains more freedom and what freedom means, and how it's just basically the ability to make more choices. And we talked about, how consequences can be positive and negative, and they are positive and negative. And then we kind of talked about some of the tools that Moneypants has to offer, and what the end goal of Moneypants is to prepare our kids for, being on their own, having developed that work ethic, having developed their superpowers, but also learning how to make good choices. It's like a byproduct. And going back to your experience, Hannah, where your friend said, you're controlling your kids by rewarding them and giving them consequences. We couldn't disagree more. It's actually the 100% the opposite, where by doing these things, we're giving our kids more freedom and more choices, because they're able to show that they have the ability to make good choices. And that's where freedom comes from, is making good choices over time and showing that you can be responsible for the freedoms that you've been given. And it helps better prepare them to make bigger and bigger choices. And also, at the same time, it prevents them from having choices where the consequences could be very severe. We're actually protecting them from those by just backing it off a little bit, not even giving them some choices that could hurt them. And it's kind of an act of mercy. And we slowly increase the freedoms that they have until they leave home. And it's just like this natural, logical, smooth transition into the adult world. Anyway, so that's it. We're going to talk about this more in our next podcast, where we talk about how to kind of craft these consequences. But that's it. That's it for today. If you like what you hear in this podcast, please tell your friends. They may want to listen too. And if you have a suggestion for a future podcast, go to our website under support and click contact us, send us an email, and we'll get right on it. But that's it for today. Enjoy our mystery guest composition, which really makes me laugh. We'll see you next time.
Ignite greatness in you. In me? Unlock talking about now?
Talk about
Cash.
what? Cash?
Money.
Yeah, money. I like money.
It's time for you.
For me, I'm so excited.
Money pants.
Hey, give me some money pants.
Yeah, money pants.
I want money pants.
Every day. All I want is more money pants.
Me too.
Money pants.
Hey, give me some money pants.
Yeah.
I want money pants.
Money pants.
Money pants, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do.
Money pants.